Good evening. That's pretty good. I can try. Shalom to all. Maseches Yevamos daf Pei Vav, starting at a fresh Mishnah on the bottom of daf Pei Hey on the base. And we're going to be discussing some halachos of Truma and Meiser as it relates to marriages that really weren't quite as good as they could have been or should have been. And we'll be learning a full blot up until the Mishnah and almost the very same spot on the bottom of Pei Vav on the base. Housekeeping announcements. The learning for the next few days is going to work as follows. Tomorrow night is only one blot, not a blot and a half. Friday, nothing. Shabbos afternoon, an hour before Mincha, one blot. Shabbos afternoon, 45 minutes before Mincha, only one blot. Midnight, night of Shavuos, Saturday night going into Sunday is going to be one blot as well. And then Sunday afternoon will be one blot. Everything is one blot. It's just not on Friday. So we're really going to be behind for Friday and Shabbos, and we'll catch up in the middle of the night on Shavuos night, and then we'll be all set. On Shavuos night, I hope I have enough time to do a brief halachic sugya to expand it just a little bit of breathing room in the learning world. If we have some time, hopefully we will. Otherwise, we won't. We'll see. The Mishnah begins on the bottom of Pei Amud Beis. Bas Yisrael me'ureses l'kohen. Regular Yisrael woman, she's engaged to a kohen. Or a me'uberes mi kohen, a woman who's pregnant from a kohen, but she's no longer married to him. Or a shomeres yavam l'kohen, a woman was married to Ruvain, and Ruvain died, and now she's a shomeres yavam to Shimon, and Shimon's a kohen. V'chein bas kohen liYisrael, and a relationship with a bas kohen who's married to a Yisrael. Lo sochal b'truma. In all of these cases, the women are not able to eat truma. So if you look back at the cases, the Yisrael me'ureses the kohen, the woman who's pregnant from a kohen, and in all of these cases, there's no truma. That's case number one of our Mishnah. Case number two. Bas Yisrael me'ureses Levi. The first part of the Mishnah was all about Kohanim. What about a Bas Yisrael who's engaged to a Levi? Or me'uberes mi Levi, or she's pregnant from a Levi, but no longer married to him. Or shomeres yavam leLevi. Ruvain and Shimon are brothers of Levim. Ruvain was married to Rachel. Ruvain died. And then she falls to Shimon, be'yibum, he's a Levi. V'chein bas Levi liYisrael. In all of these cases, lo sochal b'maiser. We know that, of course, Levim get maiser, Kohanim get truma. Fine. The third case of the Mishnah, Bas Levi me'ureses l'kohen. So the first two cases were Yisrael to Kohen and Yisrael to Levi. Now, what about the mix of the two higher statuses within the community? Bas Levi me'ureses l'kohen, a Bas Levi who's married to and engaged to a Kohen, or me'uberes mi Kohen, a Levi woman, a Bas Levi who's pregnant from a Kohen but not married to him, or this Levi woman is shomeres yavam l'kohen. She's about to get married to Shimon, who's a Kohen through Yibum, v'chein bas Kohen leLevi. In these cases, lo socha lo b'truma v'lo b'maiser. Now, there's a lot of things that jump off the page here that really are complicated, and we're going to go through pretty much all of them over the course of the next block. The Gemara says, as the Gemara opens 2 lines from the bottom on Pei Amud Beis, wait 1 second. V'tehei zara mi lo achla b'maiser. Why is it that in the second case, when we're talking about maiser, why can't she eat maiser? You're allowed to eat meiser. That's not a problem. A Levi can have meiser, and so can other people. A zar is allowed to eat meiser. If you take a look at Rashi gives the Mari Makom as to how this works. On the bottom line of the page, Dibur Hamaschel Milo Achla b'meiser, the pasuk says, Kol zar lo yochel kodesh ksiv, and b'meiser rishon lav kodesh ikri. There are certain types of meiser that are problematic. However, meiser rishon is not one of those problems. So why does the Mishnah seem to say that this Bas Levi is not allowed to eat the meiser? And the Gemara responds, Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Shmuel Hamani, who is the author of our Mishnah, Rav Meiri. Either one, because it says V'chein Bas Levi that was married to a Kohen. The second case was V'chein Bas Levi liYisrael, even a Bas Levi who was married to Israel. And on all of the iterations, it's both. It's when she's the wife. Yeah, it's when she's a Yisrael married to a Levi, or when she's a Levi married to Israel. It's in both cases. So the Gemara says, whose shita is this that says that there is a limitation on the meiser? That's Rav Meir. He to Amar meiser rishon aser lizar. The drasha that we saw in Rashi, he doesn't agree with. He says that a zar is not allowed to eat meiser. Zar in this case doesn't mean a non-Kohen; it means a non-Levi. It's a zar relative to what they're allowed to eat, and of course a Levi can have meiser. And what's the brisa where we see this shita of Rav Meir that meiser rishon is aser lizar? And Tanya, turning to the top of Pei Vav Amud Aleph, the brisa says truma lakohen umaiser rishon leLevi divrei Rav Meir. The Meir is of the opinion that a truma can only be eaten by a kohen, and meiser can only be eaten by a Levi. Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah matiro lakohen. He does in fact allow it for a kohen. The Gemara is bothered by the language of Matiro. Matiro, Michlal Deika Man de Asar. Are you saying that even according to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, there's a shita that would forbid this? Elaima, the Gemara corrects the language is no sein lekohen. No sno lekohen. We give it to the kohen with no implications of anything at all. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah just disagrees with Rav Meir. So again, this is the Mari Makom that we had that we tried to answer. We said, why does our Mishnah limit Meiser Rishon from Azar? And the answer is that we hold like Rav Meir, who holds that Meiser Rishon is Asar Lazar. And the Gemara says 4 lines down on Pevav Menal, my time at the Rav Meir. Why does Rav Meir hold the way that he does? And the Gemara responds that we have a hekesh. Amar Rav Acha Berei de Rava. Is it Rava? Yeah, Amar Rav Acha Berei de Rava. Mishmei de Gemara, that we have a tradition. Ki es Meiser b'nei Yisrael asher yarimu l'Hashem truma. If you look in this pasuk, what do you see? You see the language of Meiser and the language of Truma in one pasuk. So therefore, Rav Meir has a drasha. The drasha is as follows: Ma Truma asura lezarim. Just like Truma, as it relates to a kohen, cannot be eaten by a non-kohen. Af Meiser Rishon asur lezarim. He says that we have this hekesh in the pasuk, and this teaches us that therefore, in our Mishnah, when it says that a zar is not allowed to eat Meiser, that's Rav Meir's shita, and that's based on the logic that we just saw right here. It's based on the hekesh that because the pasuk says Meiser and Truma together, it teaches us that Ma Truma asur lezarim af Meiser Rishon asur lezarim. Says the Gemara, if there's a full comparison between Meiser and Truma, well, maybe we should extend all of the chumras of Truma over to Meiser. What do we know about Truma? We know that when it comes to Truma, that if the wrong person eats Truma, they're chayav misa, and if they eat it by accident, they're chayav v'chomesh. They have to pay a penalty fee. So then the Gemara says maybe we should assume af meiser chayav and alav misa v'chomesh. Really, what we're saying is great, Rav Meir. You provided a beautiful Mari Makom to indicate why a zar is asur to eat meiser. However, if your hekesh is true, then maybe we should say the onshin of Truma are also extended to the world of Meiser. Says the Gemara, we cannot say that. Why? Because Amar Kra, one pasuk says, Umesubo ki echalaluhu, that they will die when they make this profane, when they do something wrong with Truma. And the pasuk also says, V'yosef chamishiso alav. And we darshan we darshan some of the words in each of these psukim. Umesubo, the word bo is velo b'Meiser. The punishment of Misa by Truma is excluded from Meiser. And when it says Yosef Chamishi so alav, the word alav is velo al meiser, that there is no onish on meiser of chomesh. Fine. Rav Meir still has a beautiful approach to be had. V'Rabbanan, how does the dissenting opinion, how does Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah understand these Mari Makomos? If we really have a hekesh between meiser and Truma, and if that hekesh is to teach us that just like by Truma it's asur lezarim, so too by Meiser it's asur lezarim, then how then can Rav Elazar ben Azariah say anything other than what that hekesh means? So of course the answer is that he argues on the hekesh fundamentally, and he says the hekesh is different. The Rabbanan, what would they say to this approach of Rav Meir? Ma Truma toveles, just like Truma, not from the word toveles like goes to the mikvah, but it can become tevel. It can become aser. Tevel is untithed food. So therefore, ma truma tovel is just like truma can become tevel, and it can create a serious chiyuv in halacha. Af meiser rishon nami tovel. So that's how Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah would read the drasha. Uchedetanya, we have a brisa that supports this idea. What is the brisa? Quarter of the way down, Pevav Med Aleph. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Yachol, you might have thought, Lo yehechayev ela al tevel shelo hura mimenu kol ikar. I might have thought that one is only going to be chayev on tevel when nothing was removed from that food, but hore mimenu truma gedola velo hura mimenu meiser rishon. If only truma gedola was removed but not meiser rishon, or meiser rishon was removed but not meiser sheni, ve'afilu meiser ani. Even if all that was removed was meiser ani minayin, how do we know that one would still be chayev in such a case for eating tevel? Talmud Lomar, the pasuk, they have two different psukim. Lo suchal le'achol bisharecha. You're not allowed to eat within your gates. U'lahalanu omer va'achalu bisharecha v'saveyu. Ma she'arecha amor lahalan meiser ani. Af she'arecha amor kan meiser ani. Amar rachmana lo suchal. And the Gemara says that we have a drasha that clearly stipulates that if it were to be the case that something wasn't removed from that even if only Meiser Ani was removed, we'd still be Chayev and Tevel. So the Gemara says it's based on these two psukim. V'imei hasam, had it been that it was learned out from the Hekesh from above, Havamina lalab, I might have thought that eating that Tevel in this case would have only been a lab, aval misalo, that there would be no punishment of the Isra of eating Tevel, which is a Chiyuv Misa, Kamash Malan, that there is an Isra of eating Tevel, and it would be a Chiyuv Misa as well. And Lishna Achrina, a very similar version of what we just learned with the same conclusions, just a little different gymnastics as to how to get there. The Gemara says halfway down on Peivav Amud Aleph, Lishna Acharina Meiser Rishon de Tavel. How do we know that Meiser Rishon would still become Tevel? Mid Rabbi Yossi Nafka, we learn it out from Rabbi Yossi's drasha that where the Gemara says, what is the drasha there? His Gzeira Shava that we learned out earlier from Rabbi Yossi and the Brisa, and says the Gemara, I might have thought there as well. If I learned out from Rabbi Yossi, I would have misunderstood and thought that the punishment of eating tevel by Meiser would have only been a lav and not Isser Misa Kamashmalan, that's not true. So the Maisa, let's summarize. We learned in our Mishnah that in a case where a Bas Levi is involved with a Yisrael, or Yisraelis is involved with a Levi, that she's not allowed to have the Meiser according to Rav Meir, because Rav Meir holds that the Isser of Zar applies even to a Levi, even to a non-Levi. Says the Gemara, B'mayu Kimta, how did we clarify our Mishnah? We said Rav Meir. But if that's true, then I don't understand at the end of our Mishnah. What does our Mishnah say? A Maseifa, it says as follows: Bas Levi me'uresas lekohen, that if you have a Levi woman who's engaged to a Kohen, ubas Kohen leLevi, or you have a woman who's a Kohenes who's married to a Levi, lo sochal lo b'truma v'lo b'meiser. Says the Gemara, I don't understand. Hacha mai zarus ika. Even according to Rav Meir, these people can still fall back on their laurels and go home. And when they go home, they can eat, because a Levi who goes back to her house, she's a Bas Levi, she can eat if she gets divorced from her husband. And the same is true for a Kohenes who goes back to her house. Why then do we restrict people, even if they're a Bas Levi going home and a Bas Kohen going home? Why do we restrict them from their respective Meiser and Truma? And the Gemara responds, Eino nosenes rishus litro. Eino nosenes rishus litro. So we say that no. What we're saying is that she's allowed to, that she is not allowed to give permission to others to do truma. That's what eina ochelas means. It means eina nosenes, that she's not allowed to give other people permission. Michlal, says the Gemara, that's true, and she's only engaged. However, dinesua nosenes rishus. Maybe the din should be that instead of only being engaged, but when she's actually married, she is allowed to let other people take truma from her husband's food. Says the Gemara, that's exactly right. She is. If she's married, she's allowed. Ve'atanya, as the Brisa writes, the pasuk says, that you're allowed to eat it everywhere, you and your house. Limed al nesua bas Yisrael, that if a bas Yisrael is fully married, then shenos and rishos litrum, she's allowed to have other people take meiser, take truma from her husband's food, no problem. Says the Gemara, how do you know? 3/4 of the way down. You say that the way we understand this is about whether or not she has permission to allow truma to be taken from her husband's food. Maybe we should say it's much simpler. It's only about eating, because that language is anyways reflected in our Mishnah. Says the Gemara, we can't say that. Amras, we already said truma chamura ochelas. We know that a woman who's a kohen, and that's more chamur than meiser, she's allowed to eat, than meiser akalo kol shekin. All the more so she's allowed to eat. So therefore, she's allowed to eat. All the more so she's allowed to eat meiser, and therefore it can't be that that's what the pasuk, what the Gemara has meant, because it's too obvious, and therefore it must be that what it's referring to is a woman who is fully married is now allowed to have other people take trum and meiser from her husband's food. And says the Gemara, Mar berei de Ravna Amar Lomar, what's going on here? She'ein cholken la meiser beveis hagranos. What's going on here that we don't give her rishus is that she's not allowed to go down to the beis hagranos, to the place where the grain is ground up. I always wondered, is the word granos and grain, are they etymologically tied? Just the modern word of grain. There are so many words that if you look through Shas, like the word maven in English is from the word mavin, and there's a lot of words like that. I'm always curious as to how that works, if anybody has seen any sources on this. Granos, Beis HaGranos is the grain place, and Granos, GRN, it's just very similar. No? Sounds right. Totally made up, completely made up. Okay, that's what the Gemara says, is that we don't allow her to go down to the threshing floor where all the grains are. Why not? Well, there's a machlokes about this. One is because we don't want her to be alone with people, with other men, because that's an isur of yichud. And the second is a different concern, is that if she ever gets divorced, she might then be asur to benefit from these foods. So says the Gemara, I could understand you restricting her from going down to the threshing floor of the grains because of yichud. I don't understand. If you're concerned about her becoming a grusha, who cares if she becomes a grusha bas levi miloach lebemaiser? If she gets divorced and she's a bas levi, who cares? She can eat it anyways. That shouldn't be a reason to restrict her from going down there. Yichud is, I understand, but if your concern is not yichud, then there shouldn't be a problem at all. Says the Gemara, you were worried about a bas levi. Well, according to that line of reasoning, grusha bas kohen miloach lebetshuma. Obviously, that's not what's going on because your question is obvious. Of course, that's true. So what's going on here? Says the Gemara, 5 lines from the bottom. Ella gzeira mishum grusha bas Yisrael. What we're concerned about is if the woman who married this Levi is a bas Yisrael, and when she gets divorced, she's not able to benefit from the grains, and therefore we have a gzeira derabanan that she's not allowed to go down to the threshing floor.
Wouldn't she know if her marriage is not eating?
Doesn't matter because even we don't allow a Levi or Kohen either. We don't matter. It's a gzeira derabanan on a lip for sure. The Yisrael can't eat it. That's for sure.
Right.
But we don't even allow the Levi and the Kohen. It's a gzeira just like a low plug. Women are not allowed to go down to the threshing floor in this regard, in this space, to give out food from her husband, to let them take Truma and Meiser, because in the event that they get divorced and the wife happens to be Israel, she may erroneously think she can eat the grains, and that's not correct. Says the Gemara, Ihachi, why then does our Mishnah say my area me'ureses? It should say afilu nesua nami. The bigger chiddush is in the case of nesua. Says the Gemara, you're right. Logically, that's true, but I did the tana reisha me'ureses, tani nama seifa me'ureses. Only for the sake of symmetry and Mishnayos do we have the language of me'ureses in our Mishnah. Another brisa that's very similar to the one that's at the very top of this page, Tanu Rabbanan. Truma l'kohen u'maiser rishon l'levi divrei Rabbi Akiva. That is the exact same language on the top line. Truma l'kohen u'maiser rishon l'levi divrei Rabbi Meir, just different people. Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Akiva seem to agree that truma can only be eaten by a kohen and maiser rishon can only be eaten by a Levi. And Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah, who was the same dissenting opinion on the top of the page, not only did he argue with the opinion of Rabbi Meir, he also seems to be arguing with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah Omer, as we turn to the top of Pevav and Beis, lekohen, that the meiser can be eaten even by a kohen. Says the Gemara, lekohen below the Levi. What do you mean? It can only be eaten by a kohen and not a Levi? You're restricting meiser even to a Levi? Says the Gemara, no, it means ema af lekohen. Now, it clearly wasn't what Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah meant. All it means is that the meiser can be eaten for sure by a Levi, and it can even be eaten by a kohen. Says the Gemara, my time of the Rabbi Akiva. Why was Rabbi Akiva, like Rav Meir, why was Rabbi Akiva of the opinion that the meiser can only be eaten by a Levi? Because the chsiv el haleviim tedaber ve'amar talihem b'levim kamishta ikra. The psukim were only talking about Levim. So he looks in Chumash, Rabbi Akiva. He's like, why are you guys talking about Kohanim? It seems that this is a restricted food. It seems that only Levim can eat it based on the psukim. Says the Gemara, V'idach, what would Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah say back to Rabbi Akiva? No, kid Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. Of course, Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi lived a long time after Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah lived. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi was an early Amora. Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah was a Tana. But nevertheless, the principle works. He obviously didn't quote him by name. The Gemara is putting words into Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah's mouth. Why is it that we're not bothered by the fact that the pasuk says Levim? Because Kid Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, 4 lines down, Pevav Midbeis. Dom Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi be'esrim va'arba makomos nikru kohanim Levim. There's 24 times throughout Tanakh that Kohanim are referred to as Levim. And in this pasuk, when it says on line 2, Levim tadaber ve'amar talehem, that's talking about Kohanim, Kohanim v'halavim b'nei Sadok. We see many examples of this where Kohanim are referred to as Levim. Rabbi Akiva, what would Rabbi Akiva say about that? Rabbi Akiva's whole svara was that the pasuk says Levi. So Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi is right that it's really talking about a Kohen who's a Levi, or Levi who's a Kohen. So then why would Rabbi Akiva restrict it only to Levim? Rabbi Akiva, hachalo matzis amris, you can't say that. Why not? Because that the food can be eaten anywhere, and that's only true of certain people. There are places where the food can't be eaten. The Kohen is restricted from the cemetery, for example. So if the mice are sitting there, the Kohen can't access it. So therefore we say, Rabbi Akiva says that this is not one of the cases where Kohen and Levi are synonymous. They are different. Levim in the pasuk was a particularly chosen word, and therefore Levim can eat meiser, but nobody else can. The idach, what would Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah say back to this? That's called heicha debai, de lo bai choma. All we're saying is that his only restriction has to do with a walled city, but otherwise he can eat everywhere. Obviously, he can't go into a cemetery. That's an isur d'oraisa, if under non-halachic circumstances. But it doesn't mean that. It's just, of course, you can't go. That's a technical issue. That's not a conceptual issue. And says the Gemara as a parenthetical comment, that if in fact the Kohen would eat this while he's tamei, the halacha is that he would not get malchus. And there was actually a story about this. Hahi ginta, to have a shakel Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah. Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah was a Kohen, and he used to go to this particular field, and he would take Meiser Rishon Minan. He would go take out the Meiser Rishon. So, very strange story. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah wanted to go eat Meiser, and all of a sudden he walks up to the park that he normally goes into, and in the single entry park, he sees that Rabbi Akiva is burying a mace right across the entryway. He knows Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is a Kohen. So says the Gemara, Elazar Rabbi Akiva hadre lepischa lebeikivrei. Takes a dead body, digs a 6-foot grave, puts the body right in the entrance to the gates of this place where Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, who's a Kohen, was going to get Meiser. And Omar, the Gemara says, he says, Akiva b'tarmil of onachai. Akiva is going to have his little pouch. Rashi here says what we're talking about is a little pouch that was slung over the shoulder that was used by shepherds, by poor people. I'm living. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was a wealthy gentleman. So whatever this means, I in the Maharsha for different pshatim and what's going on here as to what this kind of language is. And Itmar, the Gemara asks a question. According to the Shita that says, and this is the Shita Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, according to the Shita that says that not only can Levim eat Meiser, obviously, but also Kohanim can. Why is it that they have to share? Why is it that the Levim, whose portion of people's food is Meiser, why do they have to share with Kohanim? So it says the Gemara, a third of the way down on Pei Vav Amud Beis, that's Pligi bar Reb Yonasan v'Savi, the machlokas between Reb Yonasan and the elders of the community. One is that it's a punishment, it's a consequence because the Levim did not come up to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash with Ezra. And according to some, the reason why the Kohanim are allowed to partake in the Meiser is because when a Kohen is Tameh, he's not allowed to eat Truma, limited in his food opportunities, and therefore the Levim have to share the Meiser. Says the Gemara, I understand, says the Gemara, that according to the first opinion, that the reason why Levim have to share their Meiser with Kohanim is because they're being given a slap on the wrist for not having gone up with Ezra to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash. I understand. But if the reason why we're saying that the Kohanim are allowed to eat the Meiser of the Levim is because the Kohanim are tummy, why is that the Levi's problem? Why is that his problem? Tell them go find other food. That's the Meiser belongs to the Levim. Why? That doesn't make sense. So therefore, the Gemara says you're right. Halfway down, Pei Vav Amud Beis, heading to the next Mishnah. Ela Kuli Alma agrees that Kansa Shalo Alu Bimei Ezra. Really, the deep reason as to why the Levim have to share Meiser with the Kohanim is because they didn't come up to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash with Ezra. What are Rav Yonasan and Savi? What are they arguing about? What are Rav Yonasan and the elders arguing about? Marsavar kansel ani, and one is that the consequence only applies to poor people. Marsavar kohanim b'meitumasan aniyim ninhu, and the other shita holds that kohanim, when they are tmeim, they're treated like poor people. Says the Gemara in the parentheses, which we are going to read, according to the Shita that says that the only people who are eligible to partake of Meiser are poor people. Well, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is rich, so therefore it makes perfect sense to restrict Kohanim from entering. Therefore, he put a dead person at the entrance to this gate. But according to the Shita that says that Kohanim are treated like Aniyim, even if they have financial wealth. But if we're going to say that Kohanim are treated like poor people, why then would Rabbi Akiva restrict Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah from going into this field to eat? And the Gemara says 2/3 of the way down, if the reason you're showing up is because you are a Kohen and there was a knas, then I understand, you're right. You have a merit to enter the field. But if you're thinking that this is your portion, that's not true, and leslach. Says the Gemara from a historical background. How do we know that the Levim did not join Ezra on his aliyah to Eretz Yisrael? Says the Gemara, the pasuk reads, "Ve'ekbetzeim el hanahar haba el ahava v'nachane sham yamim shlosha va'avina va'am uvakohanim u'mibnei Levi lo matzasi sham." There were no bnei Levi found over there. That's a very clear pasuk. Amar Rav Chizda betchila lo hayu ma'amidim shotron ela min haLevim. It used to be that the Levim were the ones who were the guards. However, because they didn't show up with Ezra, the Gemara says, Ella mi Yisrael. It has to only be from Yisrael. That there need to be a lot of judges, a lot of shotrim, a lot of officers, but they have to come from Yisrael. We'll stop right here at this mission on the bottom of Pei Vav Amud Beis. We'll pick up tomorrow night with just one blot, and then after that we'll pick up Shabbos afternoon, followed by middle of the night, followed by Sunday afternoon, followed by Monday afternoon. Wishing you all a beautiful night.
No, I'm so thrilled.
I am thrilled.